things first. There we go. There's the alert. The first things first, we'll kick ourselves off with a karakia. Tui aki runga, tui aki raro, tui aki waho, tui aki roto, tui aki te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, haumi e, hui e, tā iki e. As I said, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming along, spending part of your evening with us. We're here today to talk about what ORC knows about air quality, the key issues for air quality, and what we can do about those problems. But the most important thing we're here to do is to hear from you guys. So thank you very much for joining in. As I said, a couple of housekeeping things. We'll try and run this webinar for about an hour. This afternoon's one only went for 45 minutes, so we get through it quickly. That's all to the good. We'll have a bit of a presentation. There'll be time for questions as we go. If you've got things that you think of while I'm nattering away, you can type those into the chat. You can type questions in there, but we'll also have pauses where, if you prefer, you can stick your hand up and we can get you on the microphone. If you haven't used Zoom before, if you look down the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon for reacting. So if you click on that, the hand up icon is under there. We've got some other staff on the chat today. You might have already seen they're sort of keeping an eye out for questions while I'm yapping away. Today we've got Fleur, Kirsten, Hillary, and Vivian over there, and I also see Councillor Elliot Ware in the chat, which is marvellous. So good to have you all along. Now, I have to say we are sadly shorter air scientists today. Air science expert Sarah Harrison is sick, like so many of people have been, and she might be lurking and listening, but she's not up to the Q&A just at the moment. Any questions that you have that need a scientific answer, we'll record, and this meeting and all our answers to those questions we're going to post on our website so that everybody will be able to see them. So let's kick into it. Today, as I said, is all about your feedback about air quality, and we're particularly focused on air quality and health. I will say to kick off with, as it says on the slide there, we're not talking about climate change today. That's a separate work program at ORC. We are working on it. It's just not part of this particular piece of work. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is available on our website, as well as a survey that you can go and fill out. We'd be very gratified if you'd go and do that at www.orc.govt.nz/fresh air. So onwards and upwards. Today, we're going to talk about, firstly, ORC's role in air management, a little bit about air quality in Otago, and then we're going to talk our way through a few of the key issues for air quality in Otago and some potential solutions to those issues that we'll be talking about. And then we'll talk a little bit about what happens next. We imagine that there'll be, as I said, time during the presentation to have a bit of a chat and ask some questions, and there might also be a little bit of time at the end if we buzz through that fairly quickly. So, ORC's role in air management. Well, under the Resource Management Act 1991, ORC is responsible for controlling air pollution. That's a bit of a paraphrase, but at a basic level, ORC controls discharges to air for the sustainable management of resources. And under the Resource Management Act also is a set of standards, the National Environmental Standards for Air Quality 2004, the NESAC, which sets limits on air pollution to protect human health. So in pursuit of doing all of that, ORC does a bit of monitoring and research to understand what causes air pollution in Otago and what we can do about it. And the air plan, as you may or may not know, is well due for review at this point. So we've considered that this is a pretty good time to refresh our entire approach to air quality management in Otago. The air plan, the regulatory plank, is obviously an important part of that, but it's not the whole answer. There's a whole raft of different approaches that we can take, and some of those belong in a plan and some of those are broader, and we'll come to those as we go along. The air quality in Otago has mostly been improving in recent years, which is good, but our science shows we do still need to rethink how we manage air quality. It's still, unfortunately, some Otago towns have some of the worst air pollution in the country, and that's largely because of our geography and our alpine places and the climate that is there creates inversion layers which keep the smoke in and trap the smoke and means that we have several places that don't comply with the NESAC, those standards for air quality. And we do know that poor air quality can harm human health. And in fact, as research goes on, it suggests that air quality has more significant effects for human health than perhaps we previously thought. This is a diagram from the World Health Organization, just showing a few emission sources and obviously an international picture, but these are all things that we experience in Otago. These are all sources of air pollution. The key one for us, as I'll come to, is household energy and household heating there. And the main pollutants that we're worried about, in fact, the key pollutant is particulate matter, or PM for short. That's Otago's biggest air quality concern. It's mostly caused by incomplete combustion, and it's basically small bits that are airborne and float around in the air and can be breathed in. The main one that we measure at the moment is PM10, which is bits of particulate matter that are less than 10 microns across. But as research has progressed, it turns out that even smaller bits, the PM2.5, which are very, very small indeed, are even more of a bother. They can get quite deep in people's lungs and cause issues that way. And we know that the main source of that particulate matter is solid fuel burners being used for home heating. The other key pollutant is nitrogen dioxide. The main source of that is vehicle emissions. And as it says there, recent research suggests it's more harmful to health than previously thought. Now, we don't actually have a problem with this in Otago yet. We're underneath World Health Organization guidelines, which is good, but we are quite close to them. And so we see this as a bit of a fence at the top of the cliff matter where we can act before it becomes a problem. This is a bit of a broad breakdown of pollutants in Otago. This is a illustrative diagram. It's an average across Otago, a high level indication. It doesn't reflect any particular place, but you can see there that the main source of PM, in fact, 89% of it across Otago is from home heating, and that traffic is that key source of oxides of nitrogen there. And the main oxide of nitrogen that we're concerned about again is that NO2, nitrogen dioxide. So on to our first issue, and in a moment we'll have a bit of a break for some feedback. So solid fuel burners used for home heating, the key source of air pollution in Otago, as I said about those inversion layers that happen in some of our alpine towns. Now, how much smoke a burner releases depends on a couple of things. Obviously, the burner technology that you use. There are some pretty old burners in Otago and still a few open fires here and there. But burning practices also have a big influence, and that's down to the kind of wood that you use, how it's seasoned, what you burn in your burner, and that sort of thing. And when good burning practices are used, that really improves the effectiveness of any burner. New burner technology, or not so new now really, ultra low emission burners, or ULEBs, we affectionately call them, are the most efficient that you can buy. And they are now in a reasonable price range as well, which is quite good. They're not a whole lot more expensive than other burners. Now, there should only be smoke when a burner starts up, when it's working efficiently. And so there's a lot that we can do both with practice and technology to improve matters with air pollution. Now, in saying all of this, we do recognize, of course, that it's important for people to have reliable home heating, and especially in a central Otago weather, uh, pardon me, a central Otago winter, going without a reliable source of heating is a real non-starter. So we are very much taking account of that as we go through our process for revising our air management. So what could ORC do about this? Well, as we sort of intimated, there can be rules for new burners requiring new burners to be those ultra low emitting ones, or preventing new burners from being installed that aren't ultra low emitting. We can gradually replace burners over time, phasing out multi-fuel or coal burners, or phasing out all higher emitting burners, depending on where they are. And that second one there, phasing out all burners, obviously, if we were going to take that option, it would probably be only in very particular places, and it would have to be over a long time, and with all those other considerations that we were talking about. Other things that we can do, financial support to replace higher emitting burners. We've used subsidies in the past, and those have been fairly successful over particular areas. So that's something that we know can work. General education programs about how to use wood burners best, and you'll see that this theme of education and talking more, getting more information out there to people is going to be a common theme through all of these. There are several places in New Zealand that use firewood certification schemes, good wood suppliers, they call them, so that people know that when they're buying wood from a particular supplier, it's going to be dry and it's going to be the best kind of wood that they can be using. And other things that we can do to improve people's access to other forms of heating. Obviously, heat pumps are the main one, is supporting improvements to electricity reliability and affordability, and also supporting improvements in housing standards and insulation programs as we go along. So there's a few things there, and I'm sure that you will also have some ideas of your own. These lists are really just a brainstorm of options by the ORC, a list of things that we could do, but not a list of things that we will do. We could use a selection of these ideas, use different ideas in different places, depending on local circumstances, and we'd really love to hear your ideas if you have other ones or your feelings about the ones we've listed there. So now's the time for you to add your comments. We've got people watching the chat if you want to raise your hand and turn your mic on and ask a question, or you feel free to put some questions into the chat. We'll just give you a couple of minutes to think through that.
Hello, James.
Hi, is that Gavin?
It is.
Great. Hi, Gavin.
Hi there. A worry I have a solid fuel burner. It's not an ultra low one. I live in Alexandra.
Right.
I appreciate that the air quality is poor. However, what I see are very poor burning practices. My burner is a low emission burner. It's not an ultra low. I'll challenge you to find smoke coming out of my chimney. I burn dry wood, and I use a pair of bellows to start the fire, so I have little smoke coming out when I start it. But what I see out my window is something completely different, and that's where I see the problem. You know what, the people you've got on here tonight, I would imagine you're probably preaching to the converted. But if I can use the analogy perhaps of traffic, most of us conform to our traffic rules. The odd ones that don't get pulled over and invariably fined. I'd like to see those people, and it's always the same ones. I can look out and I know which chimneys are going to smoke, and I see it every day. But it's not my role to actually go and knock on doors. But I think if combined with education, the people who are contributing most to this pollution should be perhaps identified in some way by whoever. But that's just it. It's just something I don't see on, as one of your considerations to do. That's all. Education, very important, and that's got to be kept going. The other thing that I did 2 weeks ago was to turn off my fire when it was very cold in Alexandra. It was a frosty day. There was an inversion layer, and I used my heat pump. And when I was working in my study, I put on a small electric heater for as long as I needed it. And my daily bill for power that day was a smidgen under $25, whereas the average when I had my fire going is $6. Now that's an enormous difference, and that's
That is a big difference.
$720 a month for a power bill, whereas when I use my fire, my power bill is $190 a month. So it's unaffordable in many cases for people not to have their fire. In our case, we get wood from an orchard. We don't pay for it. I help out on that orchard, and I get paid in firewood, which is a wonderful way to do it. So those are my thoughts anyway, James.
Oh, thanks very much for that, Gavin. Yeah, enforcement is a thing that we really need to turn an eye to. I hear what you're saying. There are some other regional councils around New Zealand that have had staff actually patrolling the streets and knocking on doors of houses with smoky chimneys. So it's definitely something that's been done and is in our awareness. And I can hear from what you're saying that you take a lot of care with making sure your fire burns as efficiently as it can. So, and thanks
James,
very much
well,
for that.
One other point, if I could make it.
Yes, please.
I would query the figures that you're getting in Alexandra. I note that the monitoring is done in the lowest part of town. Where we're up on a terrace towards the golf course, where it is considerably higher. And as you go into town and go towards where the monitoring is taking place, the density of pollutants is certainly greater. And so therefore I would challenge your figures. You know, if you're saying these are the figures for Alexandra, I would say they are not the figures for Alexandra. I would say they're the figures for the lowest part of Alexandra.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. There is, as we know, sort of variation over areas about what's happening with air quality, and at the moment that's the main place where it's measured in Alex. So that's the data we have, but it's conversations like these that are going to help us actually sort of refine that into what's really going down. Excuse me, what's really happening on the ground where you are. So really appreciate that. I think we'll, as part of this work, we will be looking at where we monitor and how we monitor, and that's really important. I can see that Gavin, your points have been backed up there by Francis Anderson coming through there. He says they've made some complaints regarding smoke, so it sounds like there's certainly something that we could do there. We're talking about average. Oh, I see, Francis. Yeah, thank you. That sounds like you have some really noticeable levels there, and I hear what you were saying, Gavin, about we're probably getting the people who are already interested, but we are interested in following up on those compliance issues. Francis also asks about why we use and inform on average measurements. It's probably something that I'd have to pass to a esteemed scientist, so we might have to come back to you with that on the website, except to say that, as I said before, that we are looking into our monitoring network for air. Trace, I see your hand is up. Feel
Yes,
free
hi.
Hi there.
Hi there. Just following on from what Gavin and Francis said, I think the most important part is the education piece. I would well prefer to see education before regulation.
Yep.
I think it's a really important piece. quite interesting. I would really be supportive of the ORC looking into how we can support our firewood providers for making sure that the wood that is purchased throughout the district is certified, bearing in mind that a lot of wood isn't certified.
Yeah.
So, but that is something that is, I think, we should be supporting local businesses in relation to that. I guess my question relates to rural burning.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what education piece you'd be doing around that? Because obviously we're not in a town. So, how does that work for the burning rurally?
All right. Well, we're just about to come to that, in fact. So if people are ready to move on, maybe I'd read through our next couple of slides and then we can talk a bit further about it.
Okay, thanks.
Does that sound good to everybody? Fabulous. We will move ourselves along. Oh, hang on. I've changed the screen that I'm working on. Here we go. Yeah, outdoor burning. Here we are right away. So obviously often used in rural areas for things like green waste disposal, disease control, land clearance. We do know that some people also burn food waste and other rubbish that isn't allowed. And we'll come back to that compliance point in a minute. It is the leading cause of air quality complaints to ORC's 24/7 pollution hotline. So again, there's a number of things that we could do in this space. We could control when outdoor burning is allowed. There are places, Environment Canterbury, for example, doesn't allow winter burning. We know that can be a bit of a problem because when the weather's good for getting rid of smoke, i.e., very very windy, it's not very good for fire control. So we run in at either end of winter into BENS's requirements for safe burning. So that's something to consider there. Requiring smoke management plans for large or long-lasting burn-offs is something we could do, or helping to provide alternatives to burning where they're practicable. And there we're thinking about, are there things that can be composted or that sort of thing. We could ban outdoor burning on less than 2 hectare properties. That's also something that's come from Environment Canterbury and requiring appropriate setbacks there. And once again, education campaigns about the role of outdoor burning and smoke management and what can be done with it, what other options there are, and working with councils to ensure that people can get rid of rubbish without burning it. I realise that one of the issues there is actually access to places that people can get rid of waste off their properties. That's why some things get burnt. So that's certainly something we could explore about improving access to those waste services. One of the challenges with outdoor burning in terms of compliance is that it's awfully difficult for our compliance folks to measure the output of our outdoor burning at the boundary. It's going back to your comment, Francis. A lot of air monitoring is done over a period of time. So actually, to sort of measure it at a point in time is quite difficult and also quite expensive. So there are challenges there, but we can move on to some questions and comments there. And Trace, if you'd like to kick us off and maybe make some comments if you've got further things you were thinking.
Yeah, I guess Central. Well, obviously, I'm from Central Otago, so for us, burning in the summer is not an option because it gets to the point where it's way too dangerous. So that's really not a possibility. I think on-farm practices are important, which is what you've identified. But has the ORC got any data in relation to rural air quality? So you'd have to be basing it on something before you made sweeping regulations, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's and our monitoring is in towns at the moment, and so it's one of the challenges that we do have is that smoke can travel a reasonable way, especially in those inversion layer conditions. And that's not to say we don't recognise that there are good reasons that um, rural pieces of land and people out there need to use that as one of the tools in their toolbox. The question is, are there places that we can find reasonable options for people to use? Oh, I've got. Uh, Sorry, carry on, Trace.
No, I was just wondering also if FENS has given any feedback in relation to this air quality and work as well, and
They have.
especially in relation to burning.
No, they haven't yet. We are due to talk to them. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I can go back to our scientist who I was talking about earlier has popped up in my chat, answering about your Francis's question about average measurements. She was saying that the appropriate time period for short-term health impacts is a 24-hour average, and that's what we report to according to the national standards that I mentioned earlier. Oh, does anybody have anything they'd like to say about outdoor burning? I shall move us along in that case. I will come to something else that popped up earlier, vehicle emissions. So we know that petrol and diesel vehicles emit greenhouse gases, that's a known one, and pollutants. And as we mentioned earlier, they're the main source of nitrogen dioxide in urban areas. And also, as we mentioned earlier, we're actually okay for NO2 at the moment, but we are close to the limits recommended by the World Health Organization. But one of the challenges with vehicle emissions is that ORC doesn't have great direct control over what happens with vehicles. That's all, as you might expect, more centrally controlled through vehicle standards. But nonetheless, there are a couple of things that we can do. We can, in our policies, recognise and focus on reducing those emissions through more sort of sideways things or uh, indirect causes like improving public transport. Obviously, we're running the buses, and so we can make sure that that works well to reduce reliance on private vehicles. We can decarbonize those buses, and there's a lovely picture of one of our electric buses right there. And once again, education campaigns with city and district councils about how people use their cars and where they use their cars. Things like letting cars idle at lights or idle when people are in traffic jams can actually create a reasonable amount of extra emission. And we can work with city and district councils on other projects to reduce vehicle emissions. We have some input into things like urban form and freight routes and that sort of thing. So there are a number of places that we can, at least if not direct, then have some influence. So once again, arriving at the questions and comments, is there anything that anybody wanted to add about vehicles? I see that we've had a couple of things pop up in the chat with some uh, answer to Francis's question there, asking about education around vehicles. And yeah, there's, as we say, we're looking into what we can do around education programs on vehicle use. Is there anything else there that people wanted to address? You can see from this issue in particular that the approaches that we need to take to really manage air quality across the board are quite broad. There's the hard limits that you can put in a plan, but they're, as I said earlier, they're not really going to manage the whole problem. There's a whole raft, particularly around education and getting information out there and getting people on board with new practices that we can do. So I'll move us right along. There will be a little bit of time at the end. If anybody thinks of something else, I can see Trace popping up saying it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Yeah, that's absolutely right. That we need to be able to be flexible with the situations that we have and respond to local conditions and what's going on for particular people and places around Otago. We're quite conscious of that. So thank you for that point, Trace. So we've got a bit of a lump of things here, other sources of air pollution. We've put a few things here. They're different sorts of sources: industrial emissions, odor, dust, and agricultural spraying. Obviously, they can have very different sorts of effects. They come from different sorts of places, but the way that we respond to them is actually fairly similar. They're not major contributors to poor air quality generally, but they can have quite significant local effects, especially for neighbours of people who are, or businesses who are doing those things. As it says there, odour is the source of 33% of air quality complaints to ORC's pollution hotline. Now we know that agrochemical sprays, there are some pretty hazardous substances that can be used there, so they can really be an issue when they drift to places where they're not wanted onto neighbours' property and that sort of thing. And dust can range from a nuisance from dusty roads, sort of obscuring views and that sort of thing, to if it comes from industrial premises and has some nasties in it, can actually be quite a significant problem. So the ways that we deal with these things are all relatively similar. Basically ensuring that dust and odor from permitted activities don't leave the property. There are at the moment rules around what can be emitted, but it's potentially they could be stronger. We could be more clear about how far away from the boundary such things have to be, and certain things like setbacks and that kind of thing. We can require discharge permit applicants to use best practicable options to minimize impacts on air quality. That's sort of like the example for outdoor burning earlier. It's about finding alternative options to the air discharge if there are such things. Things like composting is always one that I come back to, but there may well be other ways of doing things that reduce that need to emit to air. There we go. Adequate setbacks and buffer zones to reduce impacts on neighbours, and providing dust and odour management plans when people apply for discharge permits, so that we have an indication that dust and odour is going to be managed, that it's been thought about and it's going to be managed appropriately. And there are other ways of measuring these things. Obviously, one of the problems with things like odour is that it is quite a difficult thing to measure. But there are tools out there that we can use, like this Fidol measurement, that help put some bounds around odour and what's acceptable and what's not. And so we can use some of those tools to make our policies a bit more robust. And there is some strengthening we could do of rules for agrochemical spraying. Having said that, there are New Zealand standards for agrochemical spraying. We do need to update our plan to the most recent version of those, but perhaps for agrochemical spraying, one of the key issues harks back to what we were talking about before for domestic burning, what you were talking about, Gavin, which is making sure that enforcement of the rules is as good as it needs to be. So we've got moving on to our comments here. Francis says, we talk about the expense of monitoring and compliance. Yes, you're absolutely right there, Francis, that there has been a recent report, the can't remember what it stands for, but the Happens Report 3.0 that came out that said that 3,000, more than 3,000 people die from the effects of pollution in New Zealand every year. And so, yeah, that's you're you're right. I think part of what ORC does need to do is disseminate that information as part of education. And what we do about that and how we share that is going to be really important. So, and that's I guess a key driver of the work that we are doing at the moment, and we need to take all the relevant research into consideration when we're talking about how we approach these issues, and make sure that we're using the most effective ways that we can to resolve that stuff. But it's a very, very salient point. Thanks, Francis. So I'll buzz through some next steps, and then we've got through this rather quickly, so we do have some more time if anybody has any further thoughts at the end. But just to let you know what's happening, a lot of the stuff that I've mentioned today is really a paraphrase of what's on our website. So you can read more about air quality there at www.orc.govt.nz/environment/aircare. And if you haven't already, we'd really appreciate it if you went to our website and had a go at the survey that's there. Our comms people have made sure that it flows quite nicely and painlessly. So if you were happy to go and fill that out, we'd be very much obliged. And we'll be using all the feedback from this process to inform our entire air quality response. It's definitely going to influence our strategy going forward, and in particular our regional plan air, which we are due to notify in the middle of next year, at which time there'll be opportunity for official submissions on that plan. So your feedback today will absolutely have an influence on how ORC manages its air quality in the future, and we're very appreciative of you giving up your Monday night to come and listen to me talk about it and share your thoughts. So is there anything further that you would like to say or thoughts that you would like to share? Well, I appreciate all the input that we've had.
James?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Gavin. Yeah.
I just put a chat message on, but I think it may have only gone to Francis.
Okay.
Using my traffic analogy. I don't know whether you saw that one or not, did you?
No, I missed that one. Sorry.
Okay, it's just going back to the home burning one. Just using my traffic analogy, we'd never consider banning all drivers from the road and saying, okay, we've got roads, but no one can use them because some of the drivers ignore the rules. And that's, to my mind, perhaps what, in the likes of the recommendation from the researcher who was measuring the air quality, was saying in terms of Alexandra. The only way to solve the problem is to ban all solid fuel burners. Now that includes pellet burners. Now pellet burners, I haven't read the emissions for, but they're pretty low.
Yeah, they're the same as.
I'd be pretty annoyed if they're an ultra low emission burner. So my feeling is that when I read that was a recommendation, right, ban all burners in Alexandra, that sort of got my hackles up, because as a responsible burner, like a responsible road user, I wouldn't expect to be punished, so to speak, for other people's indiscretions. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I understand that. And one of the important things is that to recognise is that I think as it was sort of reported in the paper, it came across pretty bluntly, but it's not actually a recommendation. It's just a part of a scientific report, and it's Dr. Wilton's opinion after having looked at the evidence that this is what she thinks will probably need to happen if we were going to meet those guidelines. But as we said earlier, to even start looking at an option like that, there's a whole lot of, and as you were saying, in terms of cost and access to reliable heat, there's a whole lot of other considerations that have to go into the pot before you start looking at an option like that. So
Yeah. Well, that
I,
report certainly got a few people's heckles up, the way
I
it was
imagine,
reported.
yeah,
Yeah. It did
yeah,
get mine up too. Yeah.
yeah, I can understand that, as it's certainly a pretty full on option, but yeah, at the moment we're just sort of absorbing all the information, I guess you'd say. We're still
Yep.
at an early stage in our considerations.
Right. Thank you.
But yes, we're not charging down the path of banning all burners at this point. So thank you everybody. I I'll give you all one more big plug to go and fill out our survey. We'd love to hear that. And so we've recorded all that feedback you've given in the chat, and also the people who have spoken up. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate your time. So I will move on to close this out, and you can all get on with your evenings. Thank you very much. Kua mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā, mana kitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te aorangi. Kia ora everyone. Thanks for coming along. Oh, Councillor Weir. Thank you.
Amazing, James. Well done. That was really good.
Thank you, team. Stop.
You're a natural.
Yeah. We had a few workers as well, didn't we?
Has he gone? He's gone. Okay, good.
How many attendants? There's about 4, I think. Yeah.
You know, good.
5? 4? Was it?
I counted 5 when I counted Sarah.
Ah,
Because I didn't know, because just said Sarah.
Yeah, it was 11 minus us.
That's coming up as well, wasn't it? Oh,
that was good though.
Yeah.
Engagement.
There we go. Very good. Very good. Well, thank you guys. That's us. After all that,
That's a wrap.
mustn't hurry. Thanks very much, you guys, for managing all of that. For your excellent triaging.
Yeah, Vivian did well.
That's good. Thank you. I guess Sarah probably isn't on the chat. I can flick her a message. Very good to have her chiming in.
yes.
Good.
Oh, nice.
It's just us. Yeah. Oh, you're happy, Kirsten? Aces. All at a night. Catch ya.
So yeah.